Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we travel into the heart of winter, where isolation becomes a whisper and shadows don't always behave. 10 true tales unfold cabins that don't exist, figures that never move, and whispers that follow you home. Each story begins quietly and ends somewhere you wish you'd never gone. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. Buried Tracks. The snow was falling so hard, it felt like the sky was collapsing. I had not seen another car for over an hour, and the heater in my broken-down Subaru had given out 20 minutes ago. My phone was dead, my breath came out in sharp clouds, and the forest around me looked like it had swallowed the world whole. I was completely alone, or so I thought. I had been driving back from a weekend ski trip in northern Alberta. The lodge was quiet, the kind of place you go to disappear for a while. And I guess that was the point. I had left a little later than planned, thinking I could beat the snowstorm that had been creeping in all morning. But a few hours into the drive, my engine started sputtering. I pulled over to the side of a long, empty logging road with dense pines on both sides and no signs of life for miles. There was no signal, no radio, no passing headlights. Just the slow descent of white that blurred the world and dulled every sound. I was dressed for skiing, not survival. My jacket was warm but thin, my gloves were still damp from earlier that day, and my boots were already stiff from the cold. I tried restarting the engine over and over until the battery gave out. After that, I sat in silence, my body starting to shiver as the temperature dropped below freezing. I kept thinking a plow or ranger would come by eventually. But as the snow deepened and the forest grew darker, I realized no one was coming. I was just about to give up and bury myself in the back seat under a few blankets when I saw them, headlights distant, but moving steadily toward me through the storm. Relief flooded my chest so quickly, I nearly cried. I stepped out of the car, nearly losing my footing on the icy ground, and waved my arms, hoping whoever it was would see me. The vehicle slowed as it approached the beams, growing brighter, until I could make out the large silhouette of a pickup truck, old and heavy with chains wrapped around its tires. It rumbled to a stop just a few yards ahead. The driver rolled down the window slowly. He was a large man with a gray beard and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me, eyes dull and unreadable. Finally, he nodded toward the passenger seat. "Need a ride, huh?" I hesitated. Something about his stillness made my skin crawl. But the wind had picked up and snow was slicing across my face like tiny blades. I nodded and opened the door. The warmth inside was overwhelming, but so was the smell. Cigarette smoke, damp wool, and something else. Something sharp, something metallic. I shut the door and tried to steady my breath as the man pulled back onto the road without saying another word. The interior of the truck was dim, lit only by the dashboard's dull glow. Dust coated everything, and a pile of crumpled fast food wrappers littered the floor. I glanced toward the back seat and froze. There was a heavy tarp laid out across it, the shape underneath long and uneven, like it was covering tools or something worse. I looked away quickly, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was just a hunter. Maybe it was camping gear. But the air smelled wrong. Not just smoke and sweat, but something sour like rusted metal and rot. The man's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, unblinking. I tried to break the silence with a nervous laugh. "Crazy storm, huh?" He didn't respond. Instead, he muttered, not looking at me, "You're lucky I came by. Most folks wouldn't stop for someone like you." I forced a smile, nodding. But something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. I noticed his speed wasn't slowing. In fact, we were going faster. And then I realized we were no longer on the main road. The truck turned sharply onto a narrow path, barely wide enough for its wheels, the snow untouched, and the trees pressing in close from both sides. My pulse quickened. I shifted in my seat, trying to sound calm. "Hey, is this a shortcut?" He didn't answer. His jaw clenched, and he gripped the wheel tighter. The headlights barely pierced the darkness now. I considered opening the door and jumping, but the truck was moving too fast. Just as panic started to rise in my throat, he slammed on the brakes. I lurched forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest. We were in a small clearing surrounded by forest. The man cut the engine and stepped out without a word. I sat frozen, heart pounding in my ears. Then I saw him open the tailgate. He dragged out something wrapped in a black tarp and flung it onto the snow with a heavy thud. My stomach turned. He opened the passenger door and stared at me. "Get out." My mouth was dry. I didn't move. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a shovel. "Get out. Now." His voice was calm but laced with menace. I obeyed, legs, trembling boots crunching into the snow. He handed me the shovel. "Dig." My hands trembled as I took the shovel, the cold metal burning against my skin through the gloves. I looked at the tarp lying in the snow, already half covered in flakes. I didn't want to know what was inside, but my mind wouldn't stop imagining it. I stabbed the shovel into the frozen ground, but the soil beneath was hard as stone. The man stood behind me, breathing heavily, watching. Every few seconds, I could feel his eyes on my back, like a weight pressing down. I dug a few shallow scoops, stalling for time, hoping for something, anything. Then, from deep within the trees, I heard a low rumble. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But the man turned his head. Headlights broke through the branches. A snowplow. Bright yellow, loud. The man flinched, then hissed, "You tell them anything, you die here." He grabbed the tarp, yanked it into the woods, and vanished into the darkness. I dropped the shovel and ran toward the light, stumbling, half sobbing. The plow driver rolled down his window. "Are you all right?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed into the trees, breathless. But when we looked again, the man was gone. And the tarp had disappeared too. The police searched the area that night, but found no footprints leading away from the clearing, no tarp, no trace of the man or his truck. They said the storm likely covered everything. But I know what I saw. I still wake up some nights gasping for air, the image of that tarp in the snow burned into my memory. I never hitchhiked again. I never drive without checking every route twice. And whenever I pass a parked truck in the snow, I hold my breath and look away. Because deep down, I know he's still out there somewhere in those woods, waiting for the next lost soul to dig. Story 2. Wrong trunk, wrong house. The snow was coming down in thick waves as my dad and I drove through the countryside after visiting my grandmother. The roads were nearly empty, the world outside swallowed by white. We were just 2 hours from home when we saw something strange on the roadside. A small figure standing alone in the snow, waving both arms frantically. It looked like a child. I was 17 at the time, still learning to drive, and my dad thought it would be good practice to take the wheel for part of the trip. We had spent the afternoon at my grandmother's cottage, helping her get settled before an incoming blizzard. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just enough time to bring her some groceries and fix her generator, then head home before dark. But we left later than planned, and the storm moved in faster than expected. The highway was now covered in a thick sheet of snow, the plows struggling to keep up. My dad sat in the passenger seat, quiet but alert, watching the road ahead, as I focused on keeping the car straight. It was hard to see anything more than a few feet beyond the headlights, so when I saw movement in the distance, I slowed down. That was when I saw the small figure. A child, maybe 8 or 9, standing on the shoulder of the road in a puffy blue jacket, waving both arms like they were in trouble. I asked if we should stop. My dad frowned, unsure. There were no cars around, no houses nearby, just a child alone in a snowstorm. I pulled the car over slowly, tires crunching against the packed snow as the figure came into clearer view. It was definitely a child, but something about them felt off. They weren't moving like a kid would. No jumping or crying, just standing, stiff arms raised like they had been told exactly what to do. My dad rolled down the window halfway. "Hey kid, are you okay?" The child didn't answer. They just pointed behind them toward a narrow path leading into the woods. I leaned forward and squinted. About 30 yards down the trail sat a car, its hazard lights blinking slowly through the falling snow. My dad looked at me, uneasy. "Maybe they slid off the road," he said. I nodded, already unbuckling. I figured if there was a family stuck down there, they might need help. But just as I reached for the door handle, my dad grabbed my arm hard. "Wait. Look at the snow," he said. I paused and looked again. That's when I noticed it. The trail had no footprints. The snow between the child and the car was untouched, perfectly smooth. No one had walked from the woods to the road, not even the kid. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the snow. My dad's voice was low but firm now. "Stay in the car. Something's not right." The child was still standing there, unmoving, as if frozen in place. I watched them closely. Their face was hidden by the oversized hood, but something about the way they tilted their head toward us sent a wave of unease crawling up my spine. I turned the high beams on and aimed them toward the path. That's when we saw it. Behind the car at the end of the trail, half hidden by trees, stood a second figure. Taller, broader. They weren't moving either, just standing there watching us. My dad sat up straighter, eyes locked on the woods. "Start the car. We're leaving." I nodded and fumbled with the gear shift, heart pounding in my ears. As I pulled away slowly, the child suddenly dropped their arm and stepped forward. The taller figure behind them began moving too, coming out from the trees. I pressed the gas harder. My dad kept looking over his shoulder until the figures disappeared into the white. We didn't say anything for a while. The silence in the car was louder than any words. We drove in silence for several minutes, both of us straining to see through the storm. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. Knuckles pale, my breathing shallow. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those figures chasing us down the road. Then just as we rounded a bend, we saw another vehicle parked along the shoulder, a beat-up black SUV, its engine idling. The driver, a middle-aged man in a tan coat, waved at us and stepped into the road, forcing me to slow down. "Roll your window," he shouted. "You dropped something back there." Confused, I looked at my dad. We hadn't opened the trunk at all. I cracked the window a bit. He pointed toward the back seat. "I saw it fall out. It's in my car. I'll grab it for you." Something in his tone felt rehearsed, unnatural. I glanced at the SUV. Its rear window was fogged over, but I could make out faint movement inside. My dad's voice cut through my hesitation like a blade. "Drive. Now." I didn't question him. I hit the gas tires, slipping before catching grip. As we sped off, I caught a glimpse of the man's expression. He wasn't confused or surprised. He was furious. The SUV disappeared into the swirling snow behind us as I pushed the car faster than I ever had in those conditions. My dad stayed silent, eyes fixed on the side mirror, watching for headlights that never came. After 10 minutes of tense driving, we finally reached a gas station on the edge of the next town. I pulled in, hands shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. We sat there in silence for a long moment, both of us catching our breath. Finally, I asked him, "Why did you tell me to go?" He looked at me, his expression grave. There were people in the back seat of his car, 2 of them, crouched low, trying not to be seen. My stomach turned. He continued. "They were moving, getting into position, waiting for you to get close. That was not someone trying to return something." I swallowed hard, realizing how close I had been to opening that door. We stayed at the gas station for another hour before calling the police and filing a report. They said they would send a unit to check the area. But deep down, I already knew we wouldn't hear anything back. Not from them. Not from anyone. To this day, I still think about the look on that man's face as we drove away. How quickly his friendly smile twisted into something cold and angry. I think about the child on the road, the untouched snow, the second figure watching from the trees. We never found out who they were or what they wanted, but I have my guesses. Since that night, I always check the back seat before getting close to any stranger's car. And I never stop for people on snowy roads, no matter how desperate they look, because sometimes the real danger isn't what you see. It's what's waiting in the places you don't. Story 3. The Man in the Wind. The storm had been pounding our mountain town for 3 days straight when I saw him for the first time. I was working from home, sipping coffee by the window, when a figure appeared through the blowing snow. He stood completely still at the end of my driveway, facing the house. No coat, no movement, just watching. I had moved to this small Colorado town 6 months earlier to escape the noise of city life. The place was quiet, peaceful, and tucked high in the mountains, where winter storms were common but beautiful. I rented a small house on the edge of town, right where the paved road turned to gravel, and the neighbors were few and far between. It was the kind of place where people waved when they passed and left firewood stacked on each other's porches just to be kind. I worked remotely as a graphic designer and rarely had to leave the house, especially during weather like this. For 3 days, the snow had been relentless. Whiteouts came and went. The wind howled so loudly at night it sounded like the forest was screaming. But during the day, it was quiet. Almost too quiet. That morning, I had just made coffee and sat by the front window wrapped in a blanket when I saw the man. He was tall and thin, his clothes flapping in the wind, his feet buried in the snow. He didn't knock. He didn't move. He just stood there. I waited for him to wave or step closer, but he never did. At first, I thought maybe he was a hiker who got caught in the storm or someone whose car broke down nearby. But something about the way he stood there unsettled me. He didn't look panicked or cold. He looked patient, like he was waiting for something. I opened the door just a crack and called out, asking if he needed help. The wind carried my voice away, but he didn't react. Not a nod, not a shift of his weight. Just silence. I stepped outside onto the porch, the snow instantly soaking through my socks. The man remained at the end of the driveway, unmoving. I took a cautious step forward and called again, louder this time. Still no response. That's when I noticed it. His clothes were too thin for the weather, just a shirt and jeans, but he wasn't shivering. No red skin, no hunched posture, just standing tall, staring. I felt a pressure in my chest, like my body knew something before my mind could explain it. Then, without warning, he turned and walked into the woods across the street. No hurry, no fear. He vanished behind the trees like he had done it 100 times before. I stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the spot where he had disappeared. The woods were thick and dark, especially with the storm clouds rolling in overhead. I told myself he had just gotten turned around and found shelter somewhere deeper in the trees. But something about the way he moved haunted me. Calm, deliberate. That night I couldn't sleep. Every gust of wind against the windows made me flinch. I kept checking the front yard, half expecting to see him standing there again. The next morning, I found something strange. Footprints in the snow. They led from the woods to the end of my driveway, where I'd first seen him, but they didn't go back. There were no exit prints, no sign of retreat. Just a single trail ending right in front of my house. I walked the perimeter, hoping to make sense of it, but the wind had kept the snow light and untouched everywhere else. That afternoon, I called the local sheriff's office. They said no one had been reported missing and advised me to stay indoors until the storm cleared. I tried to take their advice, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Something was wrong. Something was coming. That night, the wind picked up again, louder than before, rattling the windows and groaning through the trees. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and turned off the lights, hoping the darkness inside would make it harder to be seen from outside. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Not pounding, not frantic, just steady and calm. My body froze. I didn't move for nearly a minute, listening. Then it came again. 3 knocks. I crept to the window beside the front door and gently pulled back the curtain. He was there, closer than before, standing just beyond the porch light. His face was pale eyes, dark and empty. Snow clung to his hair, unmelted like frost on a corpse. I backed away, heart pounding, fumbling for my phone. I tried calling the sheriff, but there was no signal. I turned to run upstairs when a new sound stopped me cold. The back door creaked open. I had locked it. I was sure of it. The wind howled through the house as I grabbed the fireplace poker, my hands shaking. I wasn't alone anymore. He was inside. I moved slowly toward the kitchen, every floorboard creaking under my weight, the poker clenched tight in my grip. The wind screamed louder through the cracked back door, and the cold bit into the house like a knife. I could feel him somewhere nearby, though I couldn't see him yet. I stepped into the hallway and caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow slipping across the far wall, too tall and too smooth to be mine. I turned and bolted for the stairs, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the storm. As I reached the second floor, the lights flickered, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed everything. I dove into the bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved a dresser in front of it. My breath came in sharp bursts, each one freezing in the air. I stayed there for hours, too afraid to move, gripping the poker with numb fingers. I never heard footsteps, never heard the door shut. But by dawn, when the snow had stopped and light returned, I stepped cautiously downstairs. The front door was wide open. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just cold air drifting through the house like a warning. He had come and gone without a sound. I filed a police report, but there was nothing to go on. No prints, no damage, not even a mark where the door had been opened. They said it was probably stress or sleep deprivation, that isolation could play tricks on the mind. Maybe they were right, but I still see him sometimes standing at the edge of the woods when the wind picks up. Always watching, never moving, like he's waiting for me to forget. But I won't. Every time the storm howls through the valley, I check the locks twice. because I know one day when I let my guard down, the man in the wind will come back. Story 4. Reflections in the Snow. The first time I noticed something strange in the window, I thought it was just the snow playing tricks on my eyes. I was staying at an old ski lodge deep in the Alps alone for the weekend. The night was quiet, the fire was crackling, and then I saw it. A shape in the reflection that was not mine. The lodge had once been a popular winter retreat, but time and storms had worn it down. Now it stood mostly empty, tucked high in the French Alps, with creaky floors and tall windows that looked out over a white, endless valley. A friend of mine owned the place and offered it to me for a quiet weekend escape. I had been feeling burned out, disconnected, and the thought of a snowy retreat sounded perfect. I arrived just before the storm rolled in, bringing with it heavy winds and thick snow that blanketed everything in silence. No cell service, no internet, just me, the fire, and the mountains. I spent the first evening reading and watching snow swirl past the windows. It was peaceful in that eerie kind of way, too still, too quiet. Around midnight, I stood to check the front door, glanced at the wide window beside the fireplace. That was when I saw it. A figure in the glass, not behind me. In the reflection, it looked like someone standing just over my shoulder watching. I spun around, heart thudding. Nothing. Just the flickering fire, an empty room. But when I looked back at the glass, the shape was still there. I stared at the window, not breathing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was faint, almost like a shadow burned into the reflection. It didn't move, but I could make out the outline of a person tall, with shoulders slightly hunched, standing just behind where I had been seconds before. I turned again, slower this time, inspecting every corner of the room. Nothing. I even walked over to the kitchen and back, just to prove to myself that it was some optical illusion. But when I returned to the same spot and looked again, the figure was gone. I told myself I was tired, maybe too much wine and too much snow outside, playing with my imagination. I tried to shake it off and headed upstairs to sleep. But as I passed the hallway mirror, I saw it again, standing in the reflection of the staircase behind me. I whipped around, but the hallway was empty. My skin prickled all over. This time I didn't look back at the mirror. I locked the bedroom door, slid a chair under the handle, and left the lights on. The storm outside howled louder than before, but it was the silence inside that kept me awake. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the figure standing at the foot of the bed just out of view. The wind shook the windows, and the old wood groaned with every gust, but nothing came through the door. When morning finally arrived, I told myself I'd imagined it all. I went downstairs, made coffee, and tried to enjoy the view. But something felt wrong. Every reflective surface, the windows, the microwave, even the glass in a framed picture seemed to hold that faint silhouette for just a second too long. It was never clear, never detailed, but it was always there. By afternoon, I had convinced myself I needed fresh air. I bundled up and stepped outside, crunching through the snow to the edge of the clearing behind the lodge. The storm had calmed, and the silence was thick. That was when I saw it. My reflection in the window behind me, only I wasn't facing the lodge. I was facing the trees, and yet the reflection was staring directly at me. Unmoving, eyes dark, expression blank. I spun around, breath caught in my throat. No one was there. But when I looked back, the reflection was still watching. I stumbled back toward the lodge, heart racing, slipping once on the icy path. I didn't look into the windows again. I couldn't. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and closed every curtain I could find. I sat in the middle of the living room, with a fire crackling beside me, gripping a fireplace poker, like it could protect me from whatever this was. Hours passed. Darkness fell again, and the wind picked up once more. Around midnight, I heard something new. Not the storm, not the creaking wood. A soft knock on the glass. 3 slow taps, just like fingers on a window pane. I froze. It came again. I couldn't help myself. I inched toward the large window by the fireplace and pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to see. Nothing. Only snow. But when I looked at the glass itself, my blood ran cold. There were handprints on the inside. I turned, quickly scanning the room. Empty. But as I backed away, every reflective surface in the room began to darken, slowly filling with that same silhouette, one by one, like mirrors remembering something I had tried to forget. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I grabbed my coat boots half-laced and ran out into the snow with my bag slung over one shoulder. The cold bit into my face, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that place. I didn't look back at the lodge. I couldn't. I ran through the snow-covered path leading to the main road, slipping stumbling branches scratching at my arms. After what felt like forever, I saw headlights, a snowplow. I waved frantically, and the driver stopped, clearly startled by the sight of me. I climbed in without hesitation, mumbling something about needing to get to town. He didn't ask many questions. I think he saw the fear in my face. At the nearest cafe, I sat shaking for an hour with a cup of coffee in my hands, staring into my reflection in the window. Nothing strange, just me. But when I blinked, I swore I saw the outline again just for a second standing behind my shoulder. I told myself it was exhaustion, that I had been alone too long in that lodge. But the truth settled heavy in my chest. Whatever that thing was, it had seen me. And now I had seen it too. I never went back to the lodge. My friend eventually sold the property after hearing what I experienced, though I never gave him the full story. Some things are better left unsaid. Months later, back home in the city, I started noticing it again. Just small things. A shadow behind me in the mirror. A glimpse in a store window that vanished when I turned. I tried to ignore it to convince myself it was nothing. But sometimes late at night, I catch a shape in the dark corners of a screen or the glint of glass, and I know it followed me. Whatever lived in those reflections found a way out. Story 5. The Airbnb wasn't empty. The cabin looked perfect in the pictures. Remote quiet, surrounded by snowy hills with no neighbors for miles. It was exactly what we needed for a weekend away from everything. But the first night, as the wind howled through the trees, I heard footsteps above us. The only problem was the cabin had no second floor. It was supposed to be a peaceful winter getaway. My girlfriend and I had both been working nonstop and needed a break from the city. We found the listing online, a small log cabin tucked deep in the Icelandic countryside. The reviews were glowing, secluded but cozy. A wood-burning stove. No neighbors for miles. No cell signal either. But that was part of the charm. We arrived just before dusk. The drive-in was long and winding with snow piling on the roadside and tall pines lining the path like silent sentinels. The cabin itself was beautiful with thick wooden beams, frosted windows, and the smell of fresh pine still lingering in the walls. There was only one bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a living space. No stairs, no upper level, just a simple flat cabin. We unpacked, made a fire, and settled in with some wine, grateful for the quiet. Outside, the wind began to pick up, and snow started to fall harder, tapping gently against the glass. Around midnight, as we were getting ready for bed, I heard the floorboards creak above us. My heart stopped. I looked at the ceiling, then at her. She had heard it too, but there was nothing up there. We stood there, frozen, listening. The sound came again, slow, deliberate creaking, like footsteps moving across the ceiling. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it could be the wind shifting the wooden beams, or maybe snow settling on the roof. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like weight, like someone walking. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside to check crunching through the fresh snow to the side of the cabin. I shone the light up at the roof. Nothing. No tracks, no signs of fallen snow, no animals. The roof was clean, untouched. I went back inside, trying not to let the unease show on my face. She was standing in the kitchen, staring up at the ceiling, pale. "Did you find anything?" I shook my head. We double-checked the doors and windows and turned in for the night, leaving the fire going and a lamp on in the living room. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear something faint, a dragging sound, or a soft thump like someone was trying to move quietly above us. But the cabin had no attic, at least none that had been listed. The next morning, I searched the cabin inch by inch. There were no ladders, no hatches in the ceilings, no pull-down stairs. But in the hallway closet behind a stack of firewood, I found something strange. A square panel cut into the ceiling, painted the same color as the wood. It wasn't obvious, and if I hadn't been looking for it, I might have missed it. I pushed gently on the edges. It didn't budge, but I could tell it wasn't sealed permanently. My girlfriend stood behind me, arms crossed, clearly uneasy. "Let's just leave it alone," she said. But I couldn't. That night, the sounds came back louder this time. Definite footsteps, and worse, something that sounded like whispering. I turned off the heater and held my breath. The sound continued. It wasn't the wind. At around 2 a.m, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a chair, dragged it under the closet panel, and climbed up with a flashlight. I knocked once. Nothing. Then I pressed my ear to the wood. And what I heard made my stomach twist. A faint creaking sound, like someone shifting their weight slowly, followed by a breath. Not mine, not hers. Right above me, I stumbled down from the chair, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. "We need to leave," I said, but outside the snow was waist deep and still falling. The road in was now impassable. We were stuck until morning. We locked every door and window again, shoved furniture in front of the entrance, and huddled on the couch with the fire blazing. Hours passed in silence until we heard it 3 loud bangs from the closet, not from the door, from the ceiling above it. Then a slow dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floorboards of a room that shouldn't exist. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, not that it would do much. The sound stopped. Then came a different noise. The closet door creaked open on its own, just an inch. I stepped forward slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand, and pointed it toward the panel. That's when we saw it. A dark smear around the edges like soot or mold, except it was fresh. Wet, dripping. Something had moved. Something had been watching. We backed away, locked ourselves in the bedroom, and waited for daylight with the dresser shoved against the door and our backs to the wall. The night felt endless. Every creak of the cabin sent a jolt through my chest. We didn't sleep, didn't speak, just stared at the door, waiting for the handle to turn. But it never did. When the first light of morning finally crept through the frosted window, we didn't hesitate. We packed everything in under 10 minutes, barely speaking. I forced the front door open against a wall of snow and dug a narrow path to the car while she stood guard eyes, never leaving the cabin. The engine groaned, but started. We didn't look back as we pulled away, tires spinning and slipping down the hill. Once we reached the nearest town, I sent a message to the Airbnb host explaining what had happened. He didn't respond. No apology, no explanation, no follow-up. When I checked the listing later that night, it was gone, removed completely. No trace of the photos, the address, or the reviews. We told ourselves it must have been an animal in the roof, maybe a raccoon or fox. But I still think about the handprints we found on the inside of the closet door. Thin, smudged, like someone had been pushing from the other side, trying to get out. Or back in. Sometimes late at night I still dream of that sound, the slow creaking above my head, the soft breath not my own. I moved to a city after that, somewhere bright and noisy where the silence can't sneak up on you. But even here I catch myself checking ceilings, listening for movement where there shouldn't be any. I don't book cabins anymore. I don't trust quiet places. Because I know now that some homes are never truly empty. And whatever was in that crawl space, it wasn't waiting to be discovered. It was waiting to be remembered. Story 6. Dead calm on Lake Superior. The lake was too quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I was boarding the early ferry across Lake Superior, heading to visit my brother for the weekend. The sky was gray, the water looked like polished stone, and everyone on board seemed tense. I should have trusted that silence. Something was wrong with that crossing. It was mid-January, and the ferry was one of the only ways to reach the small island where my brother lived. He had invited me out for a long weekend, saying the lake was beautiful this time of year, and that the isolation was good for the soul. I had taken the Friday off work and drove through light snow to reach the dock by sunrise. The vessel was half full, mostly locals and a few tourists bundled in thick coats. The deckhands moved quietly, their faces unreadable, as we boarded. The captain gave a short announcement over the loudspeaker, routine professional, but his voice lacked the usual cheer I had heard on previous trips. I chalked it up to the cold. We set off slowly, the ferry carving a path through thin sheets of ice floating near the shoreline. Inside, I found a window seat and settled in with a thermos of coffee. The lake stretched endlessly ahead, gray and still. No birds, no waves, just smooth water and a sky that looked frozen in place. Around me, passengers sat quietly, some staring out, others dozing off. No one talked. It was like the lake had stolen the sound from the world. And then it began to tilt. At first, the tilt was so gentle I thought it was my imagination. A slow lean to the left, then a gradual sway back. But it didn't stop. The ferry rocked again, harder this time, and a few passengers lifted their heads, looking around with uncertainty. The water outside was still glassy, but the boat moved like it was caught in a storm. I looked up and saw the crew exchanging glances. One of them grabbed a radio and disappeared below deck. A few rows ahead, a woman clutched the edge of her seat. Another passenger dropped his coffee. The silence turned brittle. Then came a deep, groaning sound from the hull, low and rumbling like the ship itself was warning us. The lights above flickered once. I stood and walked toward the window, trying to see what could be causing it. That's when I noticed something even stranger. Our reflection. The surface of the lake was so still, it mirrored the boat perfectly. But in that reflection, there were more people on the deck than in reality. Figures standing near the rails, unmoving faces, turned toward the sky. I blinked, looked again. They were gone, but the ferry was still swaying, and my gut told me we were not alone out here. I backed away from the window, heart thudding, unsure if what I saw had been real or just a trick of the light. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue or glare, but something deep in my chest said otherwise. The ferry tilted again this time, with enough force to send a few people stumbling. One man lost his balance and fell into a seat, muttering under his breath. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, telling everyone to remain calm and seated. "Mechanical issue," he said. "Temporary. Nothing to worry about." But his tone was strained, as if he didn't believe it himself. I looked back outside. The lake was still calm. Too calm. No wind, no ripples, just that eerie mirror stretching to the horizon. Then I saw it again. A flash of movement in the water, not below us, but beside us. A dark shape just under the surface, long and slow, keeping pace with the ferry. My skin went cold. I wasn't the only one who saw it. A teenager by the window stood up and pointed. "What is that?" he said aloud. But no one answered. Everyone just stared frozen as the shape disappeared into the depths, and the ferry tilted once more. The tilt turned into a sudden jolt, knocking several passengers to the floor. A loud clang echoed from below deck, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal groaning under pressure. Panic began to ripple through the cabin. A woman cried out. The captain's voice came back over the speakers, but this time, it was just static. Then silence. The crew rushed toward the stairwell, barking at everyone to stay seated, but their own fear betrayed them. I ran to the opposite window and froze. The reflection was back clearer now. On the mirrored surface of the lake, the ferry was full of people standing still. All of them wore dark clothing. All of them stared straight ahead, eyes black and hollow. And then one by one they began to turn toward us, toward the real ferry. I blinked and they were gone, but the ship shuddered violently. From below deck came a scream, sharp and real. A deckhand burst into the cabin, eyes wide with terror. "Everyone out now. We're taking on water." But the water was still flat. No waves. No rain. And yet the boat kept dipping lower, as if something beneath us was pulling it down. Or climbing up. Chaos erupted as passengers scrambled to grab their things and pushed toward the exits. The crew tried to organize us, shouting directions toward the lifeboats, but panic had taken over. I followed a group toward the starboard side, nearly slipping as the deck tilted sharply again. Water began to spill up through the drainage grates, icy and dark. I reached the railing and looked out. Still no waves, no storm. Just that unnatural stillness. But then I saw it. A hand. Pale, long-fingered, rising slowly from the lake's surface, about 20 feet away. Then another, and another. Figures, human-shaped, but wrong, were emerging without causing a single ripple, like they belonged to the reflection more than the water. People screamed, and one man jumped overboard in terror. He never came back up. I helped an older woman into a lifeboat, then climbed in after her with 5 others. The release latch stuck, but a crew member forced it loose with a crowbar. We hit the water and pushed off, drifting away, just as the ferry gave one final groan and began to sink. Not fast, slowly, silently, like it was being welcomed below by something that had been waiting. We were rescued hours later by a Coast Guard boat that had picked up our distress call. They found no trace of the ferry. No debris, no oil, nothing. Just a stretch of still water and a dozen terrified survivors. I've tried to explain it to reason with what I saw. But late at night, I still dream of those reflections, those faces staring back from the lake. Sometimes when I look into still water, I see something that shouldn't be there. Not my face, not entirely. And in the silence that follows, I remember the truth. Lake Superior never gave that ferry back, because it never wanted to. Story 7. frozen eyes. The hiker's body was found sitting upright in the snow, eyes wide open, perfectly preserved by the cold. No wounds, no signs of struggle. Just that frozen stare, like he had seen something no one else should. I was part of the search team that found him, and I wished to God we had left him buried under the ice. He had gone missing 3 days earlier, a solo backpacker named Eric Mathis. Mid-30s experienced, had done winter hikes before. He had left a note with the park office detailing his route up through the North Ridge, across Glacier Hollow, and then back down by the frozen creek. When he didn't check in on his return date, the Rangers called in a volunteer search team. I had helped on 2 other recoveries that year, and both had ended with a simple rescue. I figured this would be the same. We split into 3 groups and headed out, early snowshoes on radios checked, following the trail he'd marked. The weather was brutal. Even with gear, the wind sliced right through us. But something about that day felt off. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no animal tracks. Just deep, untouched snow stretching into white nothing. After 5 hours, we spotted something at the base of a slope. Near the tree line, a dark shape slumped near a fallen log. We rushed over. It was him. But he wasn't slumped. He was seated perfectly upright, like he had just stopped for a break. Except his eyes were open wide and unblinking. And he was dead. At first, we thought it was hypothermia. But as we got closer, the details didn't make sense. Eric's gear was in perfect condition. Zipped, layered, no signs of panic or injury. His pack was next to him, unopened. His gloves still on. But it was his face that froze me in place. Not just the wide, glassy eyes. It was the expression. Terror, pure and unmoving. Like he had seen something that shattered him in the final seconds. One of the Rangers tried to check for signs of frostbite or trauma, but Eric's skin was cold and smooth. No bruising, no frost damage. Just stillness. We took photos, called it in, and began the process of preparing his body for evacuation. That was when I noticed the snow around him. It hadn't been disturbed. No footprints coming in or out. Not even his own. Just a perfect circle around him, as if he had been placed there. I asked the others if they saw it. One of the Rangers just nodded and said quietly, "Yeah, that's not right." We waited in silence for the medevac team. But as the sun started to dip, I began to feel watched. Not by animals. By something older. Something near. We radioed for a helicopter pickup, but the signal crackled with static. The Ranger tried a second channel. Nothing. Just a faint hiss and what almost sounded like breathing. I stepped back from Eric's body, scanning the tree line. The woods were dense, silent, and darkening fast. Then I noticed something strange in the snow about 20 feet behind him. Faint impressions, not quite footprints, just shallow disturbances in the powder, like something had passed through without touching the ground. They led from the trees straight to where Eric sat, but there were none leading away. I called the others over, and we stood around the spot, none of us saying what we were all thinking. Then one of the guys, Logan, froze. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. We listened. A low, rhythmic crunching in the snow, distant, but getting closer, like heavy footsteps. But no one was there. No wind. No movement in the branches. Just the steady sound of something walking toward us from the direction of the hollow. Logan backed away, eyes wide. "We need to go. Now." But we couldn't leave Eric. Not like that. And the sun was almost gone. That was when we heard it. A whisper. Just behind us. Calling his name. We spun around, but nothing was there. Just trees and shadows stretching over the snow. The whisper had been real. We all heard it. It wasn't the wind, it was deliberate. Close. Logan raised his flare gun hands, shaking, and aimed it toward the hollow. Took a step toward Eric's body, intending to at least zip his eyes shut, give him some dignity. But then they moved. His eyes. Just a twitch, almost imperceptible. I froze. His pupils contracted like reacting to the fading light. I called the other's voice, cracking. "He's alive," I said. But when they looked, the eyes were still wide and frozen. Maybe I imagined it, maybe not. Suddenly the ground beneath us groaned like ice shifting deep below. A loud crack split the air. The tree at the edge of the clearing bent sharply, not from wind, but as if something invisible had brushed against it. Logan fired the flare. The burst lit up the forest in red. And for a moment we saw it, a tall, gaunt shape standing among the trees. No face, no color, just white, watching us. It didn't move. It didn't have to. The cold deepened instantly, like it had drawn winter into itself. And Eric's mouth began to open. Eric's mouth opened slowly, too slowly, like his jaw was cracking loose from something frozen deep inside. A thin breath came out, white vapor against the cold air, but it wasn't natural. It hissed, not like air escaping lungs, like steam escaping pressure. His eyes were still locked open, but now they seemed to follow us, even as his body didn't move. I grabbed Logan's arm and yelled for the others to run. We left Eric there. I'm not proud of it, but something primal took over. Survival. As we fled through the snow, that whisper followed us, soft, curling around the trees. It kept saying his name. Eric, over and over. When we finally reached the ranger station, the radio worked again. The storm that had been moving in vanished from the radar. When they went back to recover the body the next day, he was gone. No tracks, no gear, just that same perfect circle in the snow where he'd been sitting. And nearby a new set of shallow disturbances, like something had walked out with him. I left the search team after that. I never hiked alone again. Sometimes I still hear that whisper, but now it says my name. I don't go near the woods anymore, not even in daylight. Every now and then I'll see a weather report about Glacier Hollow or a missing hiker in that area, and my stomach knots. No one ever finds bodies there. Just empty trails and perfect circles in the snow. I've stopped trying to explain what we saw. Some things in the wilderness aren't meant to be understood. But I do know one thing for sure: Eric didn't die from the cold. He saw something. Something that's still out there, waiting. And sometimes when I dream, I see those eyes staring back at me. Wide, frozen, and very much alive. Story 8. Last light on mile 17. I was only supposed to be driving through. Mile 17 was just a stretch of road between two small towns in the Upper Peninsula. Snow was falling thick and daylight was fading fast. But when my headlights hit that figure standing alone in the road, I knew I had made a mistake by stopping. I should have kept driving. I had been driving since early morning, trying to beat the storm that was sweeping across northern Michigan. The plan was simple: cut through the back roads to avoid traffic stop at a cheap motel for the night and continue on to my cousin's place the next day. Mile 17 wasn't marked by anything in particular, just woods on both sides, thick with snow-covered pines, and a frozen creek running parallel to the road. No houses, no signs of life. My GPS had just rerouted due to a closure up ahead, sending me down this older stretch of highway that looked barely plowed. The sun was dipping low behind the trees, casting a deep orange light over the snow. I remember thinking how beautiful and lonely it all looked. I turned up the heat, sipped lukewarm coffee, and focused on the road. That's when I saw the figure, standing dead center in my lane, not moving. A woman, pale coat, no hat, arms at her sides. I hit the brakes hard. The car slid a few feet before stopping, my heart pounding. But when I looked up again, the road was empty. Just tire tracks in fresh snow, and my breath fogging the inside of the glass. I sat there for a full minute trying to make sense of what I had seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was tired. But I couldn't shake the image, her pale coat, the way she stood so still, like she had been waiting for me. I got out of the car, cautiously calling out. No answer. Just the hush of falling snow and the creak of trees shifting in the cold. I walked a few feet ahead, shining my flashlight into the woods. Nothing. No footprints on the road. No broken branches. It was as if she had never been there. I turned back toward my car, and that's when I noticed something strange. There were wet prints on my rear windshield. Not snow, handprints. 5 of them smeared across the glass, like someone had been leaning in from behind. I hadn't heard anything. The engine was still running, doors locked, but those prints were fresh. I climbed back in fast, locking everything, and pulled back onto the road. The GPS flickered for a second, then went dark. My headlights dimmed slightly. And from the rear-view mirror, I thought I saw movement. Something in the back seat. I whipped around, heart in my throat, but the back seat was empty. Just my duffel bag and an old blanket. Still, something was wrong. The air felt colder now, like the heater had stopped working even though the dial was turned up. I turned back to the road and kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, trying to rationalize it all. Maybe the prints were old. Maybe I imagined the movement. But the tension wouldn't leave my chest. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 6:17 p.m. But it wasn't changing. The minutes were stuck. The road seemed longer now, stretching forward without a single turn. I should have hit a curve or landmark by now. Then I passed a sign, mile 17. Again, I had already passed it half an hour ago. Or had I? I slowed down, eyes darting to the trees. That's when I saw her again. The same woman, same pale coat, standing farther off the road, now just inside the tree line. She didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. I pressed the gas harder, feeling the tires crunch through fresh snow. And in the mirror, she stepped closer to the road, not walking, gliding. Panic surged through me. I floored the gas, desperate to break free of whatever loop I had entered. Trees whipped past the snow, blurring into streaks of white. But no matter how far I drove, the road stayed the same. The same bends, the same leaning pine that looked like it might fall, the same crooked mile 17 sign. I passed it again, a third time. My breath fogged the windshield faster than the defroster could clear it. Then the radio turned on by itself, just static at first, then a faint voice whispering something I couldn't understand. I reached to shut it off, but the volume rose on its own. The whispering grew louder, layered like multiple voices speaking over each other. I looked up and nearly lost control of the car. She was in the middle of the road again. Only this time she was facing away from me. As I slammed on the brakes, she slowly turned around. Her face was not human. No eyes. Just dark, hollow sockets and a mouth that stretched too wide, as if screaming in silence. The car spun, veered off the road, and slammed into a snowbank. The last thing I saw was her face staring in through the glass. I came to with my head resting against the steering wheel, a dull ache pulsing behind my eyes. The engine had stalled, and the headlights flickered weakly against the snow. I looked up, expecting to see her still there, pressed against the glass. But the road was empty. I scrambled to restart the car. It coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The radio was silent now. The clock had changed. 6:43 p.m. And the GPS had rebooted now, showing that I was just 2 miles from the next town. I didn't question it. I backed out of the snowbank and drove eyes locked on the road, refusing to glance at the mirrors. When I finally saw the glow of gas station lights on the horizon, I nearly cried. I pulled in, rushed inside, and tried to explain what had happened to the clerk. He just looked at me pale. Then he asked, "You were driving through mile 17, I nodded. He swallowed hard, then said, "That stretch of road's been closed for years. Landslide wiped it out. No one goes through there anymore." But I had. And whatever I saw wasn't just a hallucination. It had been waiting. And now it knew me. I never took back roads again. Every winter since I've stayed far from Michigan's Upper Peninsula, no matter the reason. But sometimes late at night, my phone's GPS glitches for just a second and mile 17 appears on the screen before vanishing again. Once I saw handprints on my back windshield in the morning frost, though I hadn't driven anywhere. And sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I see that pale figure in my mind, standing by the trees waiting. The worst part is not what I saw. It's knowing that she saw me too. And some roads once taken never really let you leave. Story 9. The shadow that didn't move. We thought it was just a shadow on the snow, long and still cast by a tree that didn't seem to exist. But as we hiked deeper into the pass, the shadow stayed with us. Same shape, same distance. It never shifted. It never moved. Until one of us stepped on it. That was the last time we saw him. There were 4 of us, me, Mason, Tyler, and Dave. Old friends from college trying to relive the winter hikes we used to take before life pulled us in different directions. We picked a lesser-known trail through a remote alpine pass in Montana just before a major cold front was supposed to hit. The air was dry and sharp, the snow packed from days of low traffic. We had enough supplies, satellite phones, and gear to last 3 days. Everything started off normal, quiet, beautiful even. Thick pine forests gave way to sweeping ridgelines dusted in white. But just past the 2nd mile, we saw something odd on the trail. A long, narrow shadow cutting across the snow. No trees near enough to cast it. No rocks. Just a dark shape, as if something stood there once and the shadow remained behind. We joked at first, called it the leftover ghost. But then it didn't leave. Every time we curved through the switchbacks or stopped for breaks, the shadow would reappear a few yards ahead. Same length, same angle, always on the path. We started to laugh less. Even Mason the skeptic stopped smiling. Something wasn't right. Shadows aren't supposed to follow you. That evening we set up camp just below the ridge. The wind had picked up, howling low through the trees, but we found a decent clearing tucked between 2 large boulders. As we unpacked, Tyler pointed it out again, the shadow. It was there, stretched out near the tree line, flat against the snow. It hadn't been there when we arrived. No one said much. Dave tried to joke, saying maybe it was our 5th member, but his voice wavered. We lit a fire, cooked a simple meal, and huddled into our tents early. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was just outside the nylon walls. Not moving, just waiting. At some point during the night, I heard crunching footsteps in the snow. I sat up, unzipped the flaps slowly, and peered out. Tyler was standing by the edge of camp, facing the trees. Still, silent. I called his name softly. No response. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and approached. But when I got closer, I realized it wasn't Tyler. It was the shadow. A tall humanoid shape, darker than the night, pressed into the ground like a stain, and it turned its head toward me. I stumbled backward, the flashlight trembling in my hand as the beam wavered over the shape. The head, if you could call it that, shifted unnaturally like a hinge moving without sound. There were no eyes, no features, just darkness within darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. The shadow wasn't there anymore, and the snow beneath where it had been was untouched. No prints, no indentations. I rushed back to my tent, heart hammering. The others stirred, but I didn't tell them. I didn't want to be the one who lost it first. But in the morning, Tyler was gone. His tent was zipped shut from the outside, his pack untouched. Just gone. We searched in every direction, calling his name, even fired a flare. No tracks, just wind-swept snow and an eerie stillness in the woods. And then maybe 100 yards down the slope, we saw it again. The shadow, long, unmoving. It hadn't followed us, it had gone ahead, waiting. Dave finally snapped. He grabbed his gear and insisted we head back, storm or not. Mason agreed. I didn't argue. Whatever it wasn't finished with us. The trail ahead looked exactly like yesterday's, and the shadow never changed. We packed in silence and headed downhill fast, trying to retrace our path before the storm rolled in. Snow began to fall heavier, the wind slicing through our jackets. The GPS blinked in and out, useless in the growing whiteout. After an hour, Dave suddenly stopped. His voice was shaky as he pointed to the ridge above us. The shadow was there again, same shape, same stillness. But this time it was upright. Not just a stain on the snow. It stood like a man, impossibly black against the white landscape. And then it moved, slowly, toward us. It didn't walk, it glided as if gravity didn't apply. Mason panicked, dropped his pack, and ran. I shouted after him, but Dave grabbed my arm and pulled me back. We bolted through the trees' branches, tearing at our faces, heartbeats louder than the wind. Behind us, I could feel it closing in. No sound, just presence. We burst into a frozen clearing and found Mason standing perfectly still in the center. The shadow wrapped around his feet like a pool of ink. He turned to us slowly, eyes wide, and whispered, "It's not just a shadow." Then he dropped, lifeless, face first into the snow. We didn't even try to retrieve Mason's body. Dave pulled me by the jacket, and we ran until our lungs burned, tripping through drifts and branches, the storm now a full whiteout. I don't remember how long we ran, an hour, maybe more, but eventually we spotted a ranger cabin through the trees. Half buried, locked, empty. We broke in through a cracked window and collapsed inside, shivering and wild-eyed. Dave kept repeating Mason's words under his breath. It's not just a shadow. I tried calling for help, but the radio crackled uselessly. No signal. We stayed there all night, taking turns keeping watch, though neither of us could sleep. Just before dawn, I looked out the frosted window and saw it again. The shadow. It was at the tree line, unmoving, watching. But this time it wasn't alone. There were two. One of them was shorter, Tyler's height. My hands went numb, even though I wasn't touching the glass. Dave saw it too. We never said anything after that. When rescue snowmobiles finally reached us at noon, we didn't mention the shadows. They never found Mason or Tyler. But sometimes in fresh snow, I swear I see them. Standing, waiting, unchanged. I've never gone hiking in winter again. Dave moved south, won't talk about that trip, not even when he drinks. But I still see the shadow sometimes, never directly, always in the corner of my eye. In snowdrifts and long hallways, in places where no light should bend that way. I've come to believe it wasn't following us. We stepped into its world, not the other way around. And it never forgot. Every winter, as the days grow short and the nights stretch silent, I wonder if the shadow remembers my name. I wonder if one day I'll step outside and see it waiting just like before. Still, watching, patient. Story 10, Address Not Found. The GPS said the cabin was just ahead. Snow was falling hard, and my signal kept dropping in and out. But the road ended at a wall of trees, no turnoff, no lights. I double-checked the address. Still nothing. Then I saw a narrow path I hadn't noticed before. And something told me I should never have taken it. It was supposed to be a quiet winter getaway. I had rented a remote cabin in northern Vermont through a lesser-known vacation site. The pictures showed a cozy wooden lodge, snow-covered trees, and a stone fireplace perfect for clearing my head after a stressful year. The booking confirmation gave an address, a set of GPS coordinates, and a note: road conditions may vary. Use caution during storms. By the time I arrived, the snow had thickened into a steady curtain. My car's tires crunched slowly over the ice-covered road until the GPS claimed I had arrived, yet there was nothing there. Just an endless wall of fir trees and the beginnings of nightfall creeping in. I almost turned around, but then I noticed it, a single-track path, barely wide enough for a car hidden between snowbanks and branches. There were no signs, no tire marks, no lights. Just stillness and that narrow cut through the woods. I hesitated. Something about it made my stomach twist, but I convinced myself it was just the cold and nerves. I turned in slowly, the snow muffling the sound of my tires. That's when my GPS screen blinked and displayed something new. Address not found. The path twisted deeper into the wood's snow-covered branches, clawing at the sides of my car. The trees grew denser, darker, blocking what little light remained. I glanced at my phone again. No signal, no bars. The GPS had shut off completely. I told myself the cabin must be just ahead, maybe tucked between the trees hidden by the storm. But after another mile, there was still nothing. No clearing, no lights, no signs of human presence. Just endless forest pressing in. I slowed down, headlights dimming against the thickening snowfall. Then something darted across the road. I slammed the brakes. It looked like a deer, but moved wrong. Too tall. Its legs bent at strange angles, and it never turned its head. Just disappeared into the woods. My heart pounded. I waited, engine humming, breath fogging the windshield. A few seconds later, my headlights flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw a figure standing between the trees on the right. Pale, still, facing me. Then the lights snapped back to normal, and it was gone. I pressed on, gripping the wheel tight. But the deeper I went, the more I realized I was driving into something I didn't understand. The path narrowed even more, until I was forced to stop. Trees had closed in on both sides, their branches heavy with snow sagging low enough to scrape against the roof. I put the car in park and stepped out into the silence. The air was thick, muffled by snow. It carried a strange tension, as if the forest was holding its breath. I looked around for any sign of the cabin. There were faint impressions in the snow ahead, not quite footprints, but more like drags or grooves leading off the road into the woods. Against better judgment, I followed them for a few steps, my boots crunching softly. After maybe 20 yards, I found something half buried, a rusted mailbox sticking out of the snow. Its red flag snapped clean off. The numbers on the side had been scratched out. When I touched it, the metal felt warm. Behind me, the car engine cut out. I spun around, heart hammering. Lights off. No sound. Just the slow whisper of wind. I jogged back, fumbling for my keys, but the doors were locked. I hadn't locked them. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, something standing where the path began. Watching. Closer now. I froze, unable to tear my eyes from the figure at the edge of the path. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long for any human, and it didn't seem to breathe. No face, no color, just a silhouette darker than the forest around it. I backed toward the car, fumbling with my key fob, pressing unlock again and again. But the light stayed dead. The figure didn't move. It only stood there as if it were waiting for me to make a choice. Then the woods behind it began to shift. Trees creaked, snow fell in heavy sheets, and more figures emerged. Silent, watching, lining the narrow road I had come down. I bolted for the trees, crashing through branches, stumbling into the deep snow. I didn't care where I was going, just away. Behind me I heard nothing, not footsteps, not voices. Just silence, which somehow terrified me more. After what felt like hours, I broke through into a clearing and saw a small cabin. Lights flickering in the window, smoke from the chimney. I ran to the porch and pounded on the door. It creaked open on its own. Inside, everything looked abandoned. Dust, cobwebs. But the fireplace was lit. I stepped inside slowly, every instinct screaming for me to turn back, but the warmth was real. The fireplace crackled softly, casting long shadows across old wooden floors. A dusty couch, a broken lamp, a table with an open book resting on it. I approached the book and wiped the cover clean. It wasn't a novel or journal. It was a guest log. Pages yellowed and warped, names written in uneven handwriting. Most entries stopped decades ago, but one stood out. Dated just 2 days earlier, arrived just after dark. GPS failed. Still waiting. No signature. The last line had a smear of something dark over it, like dried blood. A sudden knock hit the door behind me, one single knock, slow and deliberate. I spun around. Nothing. I moved to the window, heart pounding, but the trees outside looked wrong, like they had rearranged themselves. The narrow path I'd come down was gone. In its place stood that tall figure backlit by the snow. No face, no features, just watching. I backed away and slammed the door shut, wedging a chair under the handle. And then I heard something worse than the knock. I heard my name being whispered over and over from inside the cabin. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up to daylight streaming through the broken window. The fire was cold. The whispers were gone. I stepped outside and the forest looked normal again. No figures, no rearranged trees. My car was parked neatly on the main road engine, idling doors unlocked. No snow on the roof, like it hadn't been touched. I drove straight home, never looked back. I tried reporting the cabin, but the listing vanished. The address still not found. But sometimes when I'm alone late at night, I hear my name whispered behind me. Soft, patient, like it's still waiting for me to come back. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.